This was the year Don Corleone was godfathering, Elton John was crocodile rocking, and Archie Bunker and Fred Sanford were busy yelling at their families. The year was 1972, and we're about to find out the top 10 baseball cards from 1972 Topps Baseball. Happy Hobby, I'm David Gonis, and once again, our series for the top 10 baseball cards from a specific Topps baseball season rolls on. Today we are talking 1972. We already did a bunch of other ones, 1960, 1956, 1978, 1984. We did 2001. We did 19. We've been all over. Today we're talking 1972. Was there a more 70s card set than the 1972 Topps baseball set? One of the all-time greatest. We're going to talk about the top 10 cards to collect from that set. Now, this set was this is a landmark set because of the design. It's a pretty crazy design, and it's gotten a lot more pub in the recent years because it ended up being one of the Topps heritage looks just a couple years ago. So we're going to dive right into the top 10. Now, remember, this is the top 10 cards, regular issue base cards from that set. We're not talking parallels. We're not talking autograph cards. We're not talking error cards that got corrected. We're not talking. Look, there's some variations in this set. We're not going to be talking about some no-name guy that had a green variation that a PSA 8 in that was worth 50, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the base, regular base cards of guys you've heard of. That's what we're hitting today. Now remember, the way we do it is it's a collector's grade. That's what the prices are valued at. So we look at the PSA price guide. In this case, it's going to be PSA 8. That's one number above the decade of the 70s. So PSA 8, 70s, right? That makes sense. That's called a collector's grade. So that's what the prices you're going to see across the bottom. That's what those are from, PSA 8 value. And make sure you stick to the end of this video. I'm going to drop some Carlton Fisk trivia knowledge on you so you can use it the next time you're having, one of your Carlton Fisk discussions with somebody. So number one, it's no surprise, it's Nolan Ryan, the most valuable card from this set. Wasn't his rookie card either, but it was his first card after he got traded to the Angels from the Mets. Now, it's not an action shot, but it's a portrait, and it's actually one of the prettiest cards in his vast baseball card suite, if you will. Now, Nolan Ryan was still pretty young, 25 years old at this point. He threw 9 shutouts in that season, struck out 329 batters, and the Angels just couldn't support him offensively. Last in scoring, and that would really be a theme throughout Nolan Ryan's career. He would just throw heat, low ERA, strike out 1 billion people, but his team just could not produce runs, which means he could not produce wins. So that's what happened here. Number 2 on the list, Hammerin' Hank Aaron. We love this guy. This card, one of his best. Again, looking at the full suite of Hank Aaron cards, this is one of the prettiest. And if you look at some of his later cards, he looks older than even this card. Like even cards earlier than this, he looks older than this card. He looks thin, svelte, ready to crush the ball, which he did on his way to passing Willie Mays for in career home runs, which he did in 1972. And then number 3, Roberto Clemente. Whenever you're talking 60s, 50s, Roberto Clemente's name is always coming up in these top 10 lists. What can I say that I didn't say in the others? Well, I can say this. Definitely one of his prettiest cards ever. Once again, that's the 1, 2, 3 in a row now. We're talking about the prettiest cards of a player's career. This is pretty awesome. He's tossing the baseball, just chill. 3 months after this season, he would end up dying in a tragic plane accident. But he got his 3,000th hit in his final at-bat of that season, which is pretty amazing. Now, I recently sold a PSA 5 of this card. Man, it broke my heart a little bit, but I plan to buy an earlier Clemente card, one from earlier in his career, but it's pretty much guaranteed it's not going to be as pretty as that 1972 version. Number 4, the Willie Mays in action. Now, this is one of the very few times that the in action card outvalues his regular issue card, and that's the case here with Willie Mays sliding into a base, possibly with a smile on his face. So that's interesting. Number 5, we go behind the plate to Johnny Bench. Now, Johnny Bench had a rough 1971 season, and the Reds had gone to the World Series in 1970, but not in 1971. They struggled. They rebounded in 1972. They called it the Redemption Reds, and this was really the beginning of the Big Red Machine era. The Redemption Reds traded for Joe Morgan, and they returned to the World Series, only to lose in 7 games to Reggie Jackson's Oakland A's. But Johnny Bench did go on to win the National League MVP in that year, so that's pretty awesome. Number 6, we're going back to Willie Mays. Now, this one, not an in-action card. This is his regular base card. But it's interesting because oldsportscards.com, by the way, if you haven't ever checked out that site, fabulous site to look up stuff about vintage sets and vintage cards or cards from the 70s even. But it says that that Willie Mays was in a contract dispute with the San Francisco Giants to start the 1972 season, and he eventually got traded over back to the East Coast, back to New York, to the New York Mets. So that's pretty cool. Number 7, Hank Aaron. He's in his famous home run trot in action on this card. That's a pretty great one. He smashed 47 home runs in 1971, which is when this photo was probably taken. Move on to number 8. This is our first rookie card on the list. Now, Carlton Fisk and Cecil Cooper sharing this rookie card, and with all the superstars above, it's amazing that this was the first rookie card, 8th on the list, and Carlton Fisk was like one of the all-time greatest catchers. But again, catchers just are not as collectible as other players, which blows my mind. But Carlton Fisk would go on to be the first player ever unanimously chosen as the American League Rookie of the Year. And this is interesting too. The PSA 9 of this card is worth about $2,000, which is the second highest value behind the Nolan Ryan PSA 9. And don't forget, stay to the end because we're going to come back and give a little Carlton Fisk trivia action. Number 9, Pete Rose, Charlie Hustle. Now this card, most of his cards are in a batting stance of some sort, which makes sense. But this card is one of the prettiest cards ever. Look at the colors on this card. Such a cool card. He'd hit over 300 in 1972. He led the majors with 645 at-bats, and that's impressive no matter how you look at it. Number 10, Tom Seaver with the New York Mets. Now, if you're following the New York Mets moves at this point, they traded away Nolan Ryan. They traded for Willie Mays at the very end of his career, but they held on to Tom Seaver. He's pretty good. Ended up with a 21-12 record that season, a sub-3 ERA, but the Mets still missed the playoffs, which is a pretty common thing to hear. Now, some other great cards to consider from this set include the Roberto Clemente in action card, Reggie Jackson's card. I have that one. That's one of the coolest looking cards. Again, so colorful. Rod Carew, he's a Hall of Famer. Johnny Bench in action. Steve Garvey. Rod Carew in action. And then Thurman Munson of the Yankees. Man, all his cards. Not too many Thurman Munson cards out there, but all of his cards are pretty collectible. Okay, so I promised you a great Carlton Fisk trivia nugget, and here it is. First off, did you know that Carlton Fisk once owned the records for most home runs by a catcher and the most games played for a catcher? But did you also know he also once scored 42 points and grabbed 38 rebounds at Boston Garden when he was in high school? He was playing high school basketball, state playoff. It was actually the semifinal of the New Hampshire State basketball tournament. 38 rebounds. For a teenager nicknamed Pudge, that's pretty darn good. And by the way, he was named Pudge because he was apparently a chubby kid growing up, but apparently he lost the weight. Was that not good enough? That trivia nugget not good enough? Dropping 42 and 38. Okay, here's one more nugget for you. Carlton Fisk changed the way baseball was televised, if you can believe that. Now, you know his famous walk-off home run video in extra innings when he hit that homer? at Fenway against the Reds. Well, he was trying to wave the ball into fair territory, and the camera was locked on him, and it became one of the most iconic sports videos of not just that decade, but maybe the 20th century altogether. But it was actually a mistake. The only reason that they were on him was because the cameraman got spooked by a rat, so he wasn't able to track the baseball. So he got spooked by a rat in Fenway Park. That's not too crazy to think of. But so instead, he just stayed on Carlton Fisk, the player, as he was going up the first base line, willing that ball to stay in fair territory. So I thought that was an interesting, strange oddity. It changed the way baseball was televised, and now we see a lot more. We get to see the bat flips. Not a big fan of that. We get to see the slow home run drops. Not a big fan of that. But we get to see more of the player as opposed to just the ball going out. Really, we get to see both because they'll show the ball going out, and then we'll see the replay of the player leaving the plate. But that's pretty cool. Carlton Fisk, well done you. All right, so there you have it. Those are the top 10 baseball cards from the 1972 Topps baseball set. Again, I mentioned we've knocked off a bunch of sets here doing this series. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know what's your favorite so far in the comments. Coming up pretty soon, we're going 20 years ahead, the 1993 Topps baseball set. This was a landmark set for not just Topps, but for the industry in general. This was a big deal. They changed a lot of things from 92 to 93. So we're going to get into that one next. So let me know in the comments what you think about this 1972 set. Which cards do you have? Which cards do you want? Which cards do you trade? Let me know. And make sure you have a happy hobby.
The columns date all the way back to 1972.